Welcome to the UGC lecture series in computer science. In this series of lectures, we have been looking at a subject software engineering. And for today's session, we will be discussing on software configuration management. It starts out with the basic question of why is a software difficult to be built? It is primarily because of certain reasons. So, a software is basically difficult to be built because of lack of control, lack of monitoring, lack of traceability and uncontrolled changes. This need not be at the developer's side. This may be from different perception of people, different group of community. One obvious point is that developer play a vital role, but then end users having posted, they might have lot of changes to the particular product. So, that is why we have mentioned a last point, uncontrolled changes. Some of the basics of this particular software configuration management include, starts with identification. Identifying software configuration items is been the baseline. About controlling the release of a product and changes to it throughout its life cycle. I would have started with an objective of what this product should carry, and I have to maintain till the end that this product should contain only these set of features and it should be a controlled activity. The other point is about status accounting, where we record and report the status of components and changes. As we maintain in our system the different versions of a particular document, we wish to have a revision to one set of document in different phases. Say version 1, if it carries a minimum change, then it becomes version 1.1, whereas it comes out with a major change, it becomes version 2. So, we would like to maintain different versions of same product over a period, then we record and report the status of those components and the changes that we adopt to. Auditing and reviewing, where we validate the completeness of a product and that software configuration management procedures are being followed. So, there is an auditing and reviewing on how many times this product got changed and is it the right version that we are delivering to the end users. There will be a review procedure on how many changes that this product has acquired and is it the right version that we are providing it to the end users. Some of the conflicts that we might have in a team software development include simultaneous updates. Two or more persons who are working on a particular software may post simultaneous updates. This has been a common problem whenever a transaction happens. Say for example, A and B are two different persons who are working on a same document, and if the first person makes a changes on this particular document without the notice of the second one, at the same time B also makes some changes, then whose notification is brought to the auditing side or at the reviewing side, or is it just made as a draft? This becomes a conflict. Simultaneous updates, how to prevent one person from undoing the changes of another. And the second conflict is shared and common code, how to notify everyone who needs to know about the change. If suppose I have made a changes on the code that a person has worked on, how this change has to be notified to the others who are working either on the team or on the different franchises. And the third conflict is on versioning, how to make changes to all the affected versions when needed. So, as we maintain different versions of the documentation, different versions of the code, how to intimate about all these changes to the affected versions when needed. So, for all these reasons, these configuration management will work. So, we are to define some basic definitions for these configuration management skills. One is to give the baseline for this configuration management. One or more software configuration items that have been formally reviewed and agreed upon and serve as a basis for further development. Say for example, a software configuration item A which carries a collection of software elements treated as a unit for the purposes of software configuration management. This configuration A, which is a collection of all elements of a baseline and a description of how they would fit together. So, every configuration management will take up the baseline from a particular component, then it gives you description of how this will suit to these needs. Then it will have a configuration control board where a group of people who will work with the responsibility of reviewing and approving the change to the baseline. So, anything that has been formed to the baseline need to be basically been approved. So, if I wish to make any modifications on top of these baselines, then there has to be an executive committee who will make appropriate changes, then it gets incorporated to those baseline documents. Say for example, once for every 4 years, if an university revises on say the curriculum and the syllabus, there will be an executive board of studies committee who will document on the revised procedure of the regulation and the curriculum and the syllabi. So, after having made these changes, then it has to be incorporated with the baseline standards on where these standards has been adopted. So, with reference to the software, all of the code, specifications, plans, descriptions, process and documents associated with the software development effort has to be brought out as a software configuration management. With versions, a specific instance of a baseline or a configuration item is taken up. Some of the examples which a configuration items will provide are, say, a product concept specification, a software project plan, a software requirement specification, software design descriptions, source code, database description, software configuration management procedure, software release processes, software test documents, user documentation, maintenance documentation. So, these are some of the examples where we maintain the configuration items. Now that we have to talk more about the change control process that are adopted as part of this configuration management. So, the configuration management proposed changes to baseline must have some level of review. So, I will initially take up the baseline which is to be reviewed and revised. Where and all revision is required, I will study on those aspects where those revisions are majorly to have an impact. The impact of proposed changes must be identified and to be understood in depth. So, there basically requires a clarity of which requirement needs to have a change, and those are to be initially understood and should have got a clear understanding of how it should be studied and modified. When appropriate, the approval of configuration committee board, key managers and the project members must be obtained. As I have already said, we will constitute a executive committee who are to decide on the draft of the document which we will provide. Any further updations or revisions that are required as part of the development, then this configuration committee will suggest where these suggestions and improvements are to be made. So, this configuration committee board with key managers and the project members will approve on the configuration items so that it is taken forward for documentation procedure. The same change control is to be approved for all the changes before it must be properly implemented. After the changes are being made, all the affected parties must be notified. You would have come across certain products which after delivery has been notified as a failure as an initial level. If suppose those failures have been identified, say for example after 1 month of delivery of a particular product, then the entire software development team will comprise a committee which will decide on those failure products or those failure features and will rectify the same. They will adopt those products which have been made as a failure and will rectify those problematic areas, then it gets released. So, these change control are once after being made changes, it will go to the affected parties, get notified with what are the modifications and what are the areas in where these problems have turned out, and will be notifying them with how exactly it should be corrected. Either in terms of procedure, if it is small, it can be easily corrected in terms of procedure. If it is large, then the product is reverted back to the company, they will rectify the entire product and it will be released as a different version. After it has been managed for a change, now it is up to maintaining the different versions. So, we will talk about version control. So, this version control allows different projects to use the same source files at the same time. So, the base being common, as we have said, SCM requires a baseline. So, the common source code being adopted for different versions. Say I might require the same startup page of username and password for different releases of different version of a product produced by the same company. Then in that particular case, the username and password being the same, but the other pages of it needs a revision. So, it allows different projects to use the same source file at the same time, isolates work that is not ready to be shared by the rest of the project, isolates work that should never be shared. So, we make a note of which items are to be shared with a different community and which item are not to be shared. Allows software engineers to continue development along a branch even when a line of development is frozen. So, a baseline management for the software configuration management is the basic thing which we try to adopt with, and we basically put up a question of what baselines are required to be identified and managed. So, what is that which is preliminary that is to be identified to be maintained as a configuration management scenario? These are typically aligned with the major milestones. Once we define on the schedule of the entire project, then the milestones in terms of structure of the project need to be gathered and those are to be assigned with. So, anything that has been consumed as a project has to meet up with the milestones. So, we could not skip on the schedule that we have provided on the project, and it applies to documents as well as to the code. How is the current software configuration defined? It is defined as a snapshot of everything the product has produced at the same point in time. So, whatever we wish to produce as a product has been produced, whether it is on time or not, is a basic thing which a configuration management adopts to. Who must approve the changes into the baseline? There is a change control board who will decide on what exactly need to be modified on this particular product so as to maintain it as a standard. How and when are the baselines created and physically controlled? Through the use of software document control systems, code control tools and procedures to prevent the making of unapproved changes. Here, when we define how and when are the baselines, we basically understand from the document the entire control system procedure, the code to control on the tools and the procedures. Even when we are trying to adopt certain tools that is already prevailing, when we understand those tools, there exists certain code standards over which there need to be a change control or a version control, and we make the major changes to it, we prevent making unapproved changes to the existing system. The other question is, how are people informed about the changes? Once after delivery of a particular product, now it is the responsibility of higher version to get notified to the target audience. So, how do we notify that these changes have happened to the existing version of this product? It is the responsibility of the change control board who disseminates the changes of information via different communication medium. So, how are the baselines verified? These baselines are verified by means of reviews, inspections and testing of code. Already we have gone through the procedure of the same reviews, inspections and the testing of code during the phase of software development life cycle, but then once after we come out with certain advancements or changes in the configuration, then it is again to notify to the same committee whether to interview or inspect and to have a different testing procedure. Then it has been carried out and the same has been adopted with the baseline for its rectification. Are baseline tied up to the project milestones? Many projects are tied up with milestones because the schedule of the project need to be clearly understood and should be properly maintained. So, many projects do maintain with the milestones, but during the code many may not be. Say when we are about to modify on the code, we may have to basically understand the already existing code, which might take more of your time. So, in that particular case we may not be able to meet up with the milestones. So, for that procedure at the part of the code we may have to give them a more time when compared to the requirements and design phase. What information is required to process a change to the baseline? So, we may have to notify with a description of the proposed changes, reasons for making the changes, list of other items affected by the changes. Say whenever we wanted to notify the external community about the changes that we wish to make on this particular product, we may have to clearly describe them, what has been proposed as part of this particular product and where exactly the changes are to be incorporated, with the reasons and the justification for making those changes, and we will provide them with list of other items affected by making these changes with. Say certain things that would have executed formally may not work now. So, we may have to highlight with the reasons of why those have not been working and what are the changes which we have made which might be enhancing to the already existing outputs. What tools, resources and trainings are required to perform the baseline changes assessment? Say the file comparison tools to identify the changes. Say as and when we were working on the different versions of a particular document, we can compare two different documents on how the version 1 of the document got varied with version 2. So, when you are about to use higher versions of Windows, even this facility is predominant. Say if I have made one particular document ready and I have mentioned it as version 1 and the same document I have made as version 2, now to check on where and all I have made changes, I can compare these two documents together, so that it would give me an highlight of where the exact modifications have been produced with. So, those are said to be as file comparison tools, which are to notify you with the changes that this particular version has adopted with. So, either as a part of development we might produce them with a given set of resources, and it is essential for us to give a training. If there are certain advances or enhancement that has been made, it can be notified as part of a retraining session which has to be conducted. So, resources and training depend on the size and complexity of the project. As a baseline management, what metrics should be used to assess the change to a baseline? One is the complexity, average module size, number of modules that got changed, number of bugs fixed and verified, and the entire code that is to be covered. How are unauthorized changes to source code prevented, detected and corrected? So, these kind of configuration management gives a detailed note on how it got prevented, detected and made a base for correction also. There are no way to prevent unauthorized changes. We cannot restrict, we cannot prevent entirely, or 100% we cannot prevent it, it is to a minimal amount. So, we can provide software engineers with a training and a commercial available software configuration management systems provide adequate protection. Unauthorized changes should be caught during assessment procedure itself. The other question is that what tools, resources and training are required to perform the baseline management. This baseline management requires a full equipment of or a full training of a fully featured software configuration management tool. On large projects, a separate configuration management group may be needed. A separate configuration management training is required for all involved processes of the development of software configuration management. So, to look more detailed about the baseline change assessment procedure of the software configuration management, this baseline change assessment procedure includes, it helps to identify the recent changes that may be responsible for the basic problematic areas, and it helps to ensure that only authorized changes are to be made as part of the software development. If it is said to be unauthorized and proper access has not been provided with, those are the areas where there need to be no change at all. So, a change control and a version control is blocked to those procedures. And to discuss about workspace management, software engineers need a consistent and reproducible workspace area in which they can develop and debug their code. They need to be able to share project files while shielding the project from an instability of their evolving code. Software configuration management tools should provide such a capability. Now, we will look at how do we maintain the version management. Already we have seen how should we control the versions. Now, we are looking about version management. Being able to reliably build, create versions of a product as it evolves and after it is getting released. Being able to retreat to a previous version if necessary. Being able to recreate all versions of the product that the customer used to have. To talk about the different audit procedures, the different types of audits this software configuration management or the change control board will adopt with are in process audits, functional audit. As part of in process audit, I will be looking at the entire process of development of a software which verifies the consistency of the design as it evolves through the development process, whereas functional audit will verify that the functionality and performance are consistent with the requirements as specified in the software requirements specification document. There are at times been given a physical audit and a quality audit also if it is desired mandatory. Physical audit will verify that the products are as built version of a software and documentations are internally consistent and ready for delivery, whereas quality system audit is independent of assessment of the compliance to the software quality assurance plan. Configuration status accounting requirements include identifying the types of information that the project managers need, identifying the degree of control needed by the project management, identifying the reports required and the different audiences for each report, identifying the information required to produce each report. Whenever we are talking about this configuration management, in order to assess and report on the status of accounting of the configuration management, we may have to basically identify on these 4 points, which are to project basically from the types of information, the degree of control, the reports that are to be basically provided with, the information required as part of every document are also to be provided with. In summary, software configuration management is inevitable. So, as we also might understand, change is inevitable. The changes which are the basic requirements which an end user has basically provided you with, say in form of a requirements engineering, may not be possible to carry out till the end. There are at most possible changes that are to be carried out as part of the product development also. If there are many changes that are to be incorporated within the product development, those products or those changes are to be properly approved by any one of the audit committee, then it has to be incorporated at appropriate places. So, changes as part of configuration management is inevitable. Defined procedures are required to manage change without preventing the change. So, we cannot prevent the change, but then we may have to manage the change that we are provided with. Software presents many challenges from a control, management and tracking perspective. Knowing what you have and how you got there is very important. We can understand that we know what is to be developed, and we should also know that how we should reach the goal is also an important aspect that configuration management basically requires as a baseline. Being able to recreate exactly what is delivered to the customers is also been an essential component. Some of the questions for this particular session: what do you understand from the baseline of software configuration management? Who must approve the changes to the baseline if required? Is audit essential before the product is actually been delivered? Mention the different type of audits. Thank you.